we'll get to those pictures here in a moment. But the last assignment I had in the Air Force was flying Air Force 2. And what that means is I flew the Vice President, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, other cabinet members, and Congress. This picture here, at the time, Mr. Quayle was the Vice President of the United States, and this is just one of the trips that we took him on, and that airplane in the background, that's a Boeing 707, and they were used by the President and the Vice President on all the trips they took. It was a great plane. I really enjoyed flying it. However, they're all in different museums right now around the country. One is out in the Reagan Museum in California. Boeing has one up in Seattle. There's one in a museum up at Wright-Patt Air Force Museum. Great planes. It was sad to see them go to rest, but they have different planes now, more modern equipment's being flown. How do I change this? Have to ask.
It's the only picture that they.
Oh, that's the only one. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me hear.
Jim, behind you.
Okay, this is just 3 of the airplanes that I flew in the Air Force. The top one is a C-130, and it's used mostly to drop equipment and paratroopers.
So that was gigantic.
And I flew those out of right out of Fayetteville here, and Little Rock, mostly working with the Army and Marine Corps Special Forces. The airplane in the middle is a T-38. That's a supersonic airplane. And does anyone know what the word supersonic means?
Speed of light.
Speed of sound.
Flies faster than the speed of sound. Okay? And the speed of sound varies with your altitude and temperature. At ground level or sea level here, it's something like 700 and some miles an hour. And people always ask, well, what's it like to break the sound barrier? Well, this is what it's like to break the sound barrier. Nothing. There's no noise. The airplane doesn't shake. The pilot doesn't scream or get scared. The only thing that you see is the airspeed needle will just have a slight bump, and then it'll just keep on working normally. And this airplane today, it used to be used as a trainer as well, but right now the astronauts flying when they're going back and forth from Texas to Florida just to keep up their flying skills. And the bottom one, we like to call them the blue and whites. They still use the same paint scheme, but that's the 707, and that's what the President and the Vice President flew at the time while I was.
Is that a private jet?
Yeah, it's a jet, 4-engine, big airplane. And one thing I like to ask is, how many of you guys like being in school? Okay, that's good, because if you decide to go into the military, your education doesn't end when you graduate from high school or college. It's just a steady process, continual process. In my career field, as a pilot, flying 5 different types of planes, every time you went to learn a new plane, you had a month or so of ground school, then simulator training, then flying training where you're learning systems, emergency procedures, and just how to fly the airplane. But and it doesn't end once you're checked out. You know, every year you have to take several written tests and flying check rides and this and that. And also, one of my assignments, I was stationed down in Central America, down in Honduras during the war with the Sandinistas and the Contras. And so prior to taking that assignment, the military sent me to language school out in Monterey so I could become fairly, I don't want to say fluent, but to learn to speak Spanish because I was working with the Honduran military while we were down there in Central America. So that's, like I said, there's just so many different types of training you'll receive, not just if you're a pilot, but like I said, I went to language school, I went to this school, I went to that school. And you know, whether you're a doctor or a mechanic or an X-ray tech, you know, you're always going to be going through some sort of training. So, like I said, don't think that your education will end when you graduate from high school or college. Hopefully, it'll be a lifelong process for you. My wife's my wife is still trying to train me today. She says I have a lot of things to learn.
It is
so.
a lot to learn.
But during that time when we did live in Central America, both of my kids were young. One was 1 and one was 5. And that was a real experience. And the reason I bring that up is because if you go into the military, don't think that you're, going to be close to home and, seeing your family all the time, this and that. So it was real hardship for them because, there was no base there. We lived on the local economy, so you can't drink the water. My wife would go to the market, buy fruits and vegetables. She had to soak them in a Clorox solution before you could eat them and different things. So it's a real learning experience. It's a real experience living in that environment. Also, you can expect to spend a lot of time away from home. We've been married for 46 years, and my wife says it's only been half that time because in the flying business, there's no way that you can work from home. You have to be away pretty much to do it. So I don't want to keep just droning on and rambling on, but I want to see if you guys have any questions either about flying, being a pilot, military life in general. Shoot away.
Have you ever been in a war?
Have I ever been in a war? I've been in a war zone. I haven't been shot at during the First and Second Gulf War over there. We were in and out, like I say, not in the hostile part where guys were being shot at in the type of job that I was in. I was a pilot, wasn't a combat pilot at the time. I was doing this business with the Vice President, Secretary of State, and guys like that, so it was a safe environment, but it wasn't a war zone. Yes?
What?
Yes, sir. You.
Have we ever invented technology that can travel at the speed of light?
Sorry?
Have we ever invented technology that can travel at the speed of light?
Technology that can, do we have technology that can travel at the speed of light?
Do we have technology? That's a good question. I don't know. You're going to have to ask your teachers that question.
That was a good question.
I don't think anything's traveled at the speed of light yet. Even space probes that have gone to Mars and beyond. They're not going at the speed of light. Yes, sir.
Out of all of the planes you flew, which one was your favorite to fly?
I love the 707, that airplane there in the background. And it was really the first commercial jet. Prior to that, everything was all props, pistons. And Boeing did a great job of designing that plane. They really, the technology was just light years ahead of the other people that were building planes at the time. And still that same basic design of the 707 was used in the subsequent planes, the 727, 747, 76. Of course, improved, but the 707 was a great machine. Which brings up a point. Each president that flew on these planes, like I said, they're all in museums now, but each president would leave his signature mark on them. They would each modify the plane to some degree. For example, President Johnson, when he was in there, he was a Texan, always had the cowboy hat, the Stetson, so he had a special hat rack put in the stateroom. He had a couple beagles, so he put the flap in the door so his dogs could just walk around the airplane and do whatever they want. And also, in the conference room, these airplanes super fitted out, just beyond first class. But in the conference room, President Johnson always liked the power position. So he had his seat, his staff would be sitting around, and the table at the conference room could be raised or lowered. So here's President Johnson, and here's his staff sitting at the table just like little kids. And President Johnson was there in the power position. Also, one of the airplanes, they each have a tail number. Each plane has a tail number on it. And Sam 26,000, which is in the museum up at Wright Pat up in Ohio, that was the last plane that I personally flew in the Air Force. I did my last takeoff and landing in that one. And that airplane was used to bring President Kennedy's body back from Dallas when he was shot. And Mrs. Kennedy didn't want his coffin placed in the cargo hold down in the belly. She wanted it up in the passenger compartment, and they couldn't fit it in. They couldn't fit it in through the rear door, so they had to make a special cut in the bulkhead as you came in the door to get the coffin to come around and be put inside the passenger compartment. And there's, you know, the classic photo with President Johnson getting sworn in and Mrs. Kennedy there in her bloodstained dress. But there's a lot of history on these planes. President Eisenhower was the first one to fly in a jet in 707. And like I say, each president left his mark on them. Yes, sir, with the hood on?
Did you have to have a armed weapon?
Did you have to have an armed weapon with you?
Did I have an armed weapon with me? Depending on which airplane we were flying in, we had different types of weapons with us. On the C-130, which is not in the picture, that was the green and tan airplane here. We would carry a sidearm, like a shoulder holster type thing, and nothing too fancy. But on Air Force 2, the Secret Service would travel with us, plus the Air Force, we had our own security on it, and those guys were on the pilots were. Yes, sir, in the back.
Do you have a funny story?
Do I have any funny stories? I got lots of funny stories. Some of them I can't tell in a classroom environment, but I'll tell you this story. Back before the GPS came about, we used to carry a navigator with us when we crossed the ocean on the C-130, on this airplane here, and on also the jets used it back in the day also. But anyway, the navigator, what he did, he would use what's called a sextant, just like the mariners would use in the old days. He would put it up through the top of the airplane. There was a little porthole, and he could shoot the stars, is what they called it. They would call it making a cell shot. And based on the position of the stars and moon and different things, he could track our, flight across the ocean and make sure that we knew where we were. So anyway, the navigators had to have a certain amount of training, or else they would lose that skill, because you can't sit in a classroom and practice shooting cell. So we would do what we call a overwater trainer, which was really a boring thing for the pilots. We'd fly out over the water 5 hours, out over the ocean, and then fly back 5 hours. So, guys would bring food and stuff to eat, and magazines, things to read, because like I said, it was really boring, you just kind of droning along. So we were on this one training flight, and so we had a little oven back in the lower part of the plane, and this guy puts this can of beans in it to heat it up. So we're flying along, and all of a sudden, boom! And we're like, whoa! There's smoke in the airplane, and we're there, big noise. We're like, what the heck? Because one thing you don't want to see is smoke and hear loud noise when you're flying along, because you don't know what happened. So what had taken place, this guy forgot to put a little hole in the top of his can of beans, and so as the thing started to heat and get warmer and warmer, finally it exploded. And so, like I said, one thing you don't want to hear in a plane is a loud noise that you don't know where it came from, and secondly, you don't want to be smelling smoke.
Because
Jim-
it might insinuate an explosion.
Yes.
What was that again?
Because it might insinuate an explosion.
It might insinuate an explosion, is what you're
Yes,
saying.
it simulated an explosion. Pretty good. Yes, ma'am.
So, what plane was the hardest to fly?
What plane was the hardest to fly? That's a good question. Naturally, the first time you do anything, it's hard. And so with each plane, the first time you go to fly, either in the simulator or actually the actual flying itself, it's always a challenge, because it's different from the last one you flew, and they have their own type of flying characteristics. But probably the T-38, which is this airplane here, the one in the middle, the supersonic one that I told you about, the one that the astronauts still fly today, that was probably one of the hardest ones to fly, because if you notice, it has a real small wing on it. Real small, and the wing is real thin, which means that it has to fly a really fast approach speed. And by approach speed, I mean that's the speed that you're flying as you come down to land. So naturally, the faster the airplane's moving, you have to think faster. So, coupled with keeping up with the airplane and having these real small wings and the airplane moving really fast, you really have to keep up with it. Plus it had a afterburner on it, which means as you're getting ready to take off, you push the throttles up a little bit further, and now there's a special igniter takes place, and it ignites ignites a mixture of fuel and your regular hot exhaust, and this big flame comes out of the back of the airplane. It really gives you a kick in the butt and blasts you off. So that's pretty exciting.
You can take one more question, and then we have to let him go, okay?
Okay, I'm gonna close my eyes. I'll let the teacher pick one. Go ahead, teacher.
You've had your hand up for a while, so go ahead.
Yes, sir.
So, did you ever have to take any like simulator time for the planes?
Yes, yes. Simulators are really big training there. Just about for all the planes that I learned to fly, you go through a simulator process. And in the military, they still do actual flying training in the plane itself. But when I retired from the military and I went to fly as a civilian pilot, it cost a lot of money to fly the airplane to do the training. So you do all your training in the simulator, and your first flight is actually a revenue flight, or in other words, either you're carrying cargo or passengers or whatever. So now exclusively all the training is done in the simulator just to save money. But anyway, I guess that's it. Unless the teachers want to have one more question or not, or
Nope.
no?